Well, in this video, we're going to go ahead and show you how to run brake lines. This is a Model T frame, a Spirit frame. Just now starting to assemble it. And it's going to get power brakes. So on this one, we started by putting the master cylinder and the booster on. This is a chassis that's been assembled now. And we've got the booster on. We've actually drilled and screwed in the proportioning valve and the brake light switch. Got a lot of the components on, our front end is on. So you can see we've drilled and put our through frame fittings in. So we start with that. We've got front and rear through frame fittings. And here's the rear. There's two different styles. This style, we'll have to put just screw it into that. This style here has got an AN fitting on the end of it. So this is going to get four-wheel disc brakes. So that'll be a braided line coming off of the through frame fitting. So we like to run the lines underneath, although you got to be careful if you jack the car up that you don't crush your lines, but you don't see it from either side. It's a clean look, but we run a brake line down the left rail, down the right rail, bring them together, cross them, and put them into a T right behind the cross member. We bring the line into the brass fitting that has the brake switch, and then we use a proportioning valve. From the proportioning valve, it goes back to the front side of the master cylinder. Again, this one here has a booster as power brakes. You can see our brake rod comes forward and the brake pedal's on the chassis. This is a standard setup for a Spirit 23. We also have the same setup for the pedal, only it's a little different if you don't use a master or a booster. You can use a Mustang 2 master cylinder. This master cylinder happens to be from a Corvette. From the back side of the master cylinder, we come up over, put a T here again, and we run it on the frame, not the rear end. And it's possible to come down with just one fitting, put a T down here and run across the rear end to do the other side. But what we like to do is run it down a braided steel line, an AN fitting coming down, and then it goes into your caliper. So this is what a completed set looks like. And what we're going to do is we're going to run the lines on the blue car. And I'll kind of give you an idea of what it takes to bend lines and make a double flare, and just go ahead and get your brake lines run. We're not going to get real technical into all the aspects of brakes, but we are going to at least go over what it's going to take to run the brake lines and get the plumbing done on your T-box. So before you get started, kind of take a breath, get your tools ready. I've got a tubing bender here. It kind of bends at several different sizes. That'll be handy. This is for straightening the line out. I'll show you how that works in just a second here. I've got a hydraulic flaring tool. It requires a double flare for brake lines. So this is a pretty handy tool. I'll show you how we're going to use this. You can do a standard one that you just crank down them. They're not that expensive. I got a little tubing cutter here. Now if you get a Spirit kit, we have a brake line kit that comes with all the parts that you need. I'm not going to identify every piece here, but it comes with the different fittings and the T's and the banjo bolts and the banjos and your crush washers. So you'll have all the parts you'll need there, and it's got the braided lines with the AN fittings. This is one style of the through frame fitting that we have, and we also have the other styles. So there's going to be different parts and pieces. And then it comes with a roll brake line. So you'll kind of take all that and start making it to length. Put a flare on one end. Put the fittings on. Make sure you put the fittings on before you put the flare on, or at least if you're doing the second one, otherwise you won't get the fitting over it. But we'll go ahead and get it ready, and I'll show you how to make a flare. So I went ahead and bent the first piece. I've already put the fitting on one end. This will go into the proportioning valve. I bent the tube. The tube comes around to go into the master cylinder. You can see on a Spirit frame, when we put this box on, or the bracket for the master cylinder, we've already got a hole cut in there. We built a couple of them already, so we kind of know what needs to be where. That was our main intent and purpose in the beginning for doing the turnkeys, is to work on our engineering, and now it seems that we get more turnkeys than we can possibly do. So anyway, let's go ahead and make a double flare. So you're going to want to start by getting your brake line clamped into this block here. So what this block is, it just holds the line when it goes into the tool. So you can just put it in, and you don't want it past the end there, but I don't like to leave it right. I'll just go slightly to the inside of that. And that clamps it pretty tightly together. So you can see how that's sticking out of there, but there's a bit of a gap there. So once you put it into the tool, you put it into the tool and you can clamp it down, and it's ready to go. So I've got my fitting on there, and I've got my fitting on that end. Make sure of that, otherwise you'll be cutting the end off. And also be careful on the final bend. You've got to have that fitting far enough out of the way so that the pipe itself, the tube, can fit into the clamp for it. So you can see about how far it's out there. I've got it in. The fitting is past that, so I'm ready to put my first flare in. So with my tube in the blocks, and I've extended it past where it needs to be, what I'm going to want to do is put this die into it, into the tool. But the little pin on the end of that needs to go into the hole, and you need to make sure that it is in the hole. Otherwise that pin will break off easily, and you'll be buying a new die, and you won't be doing any more work until you're done with that. So I'm going to go ahead and fit it into the tool. It's going to take 2 hands for that, but I'll show you once it's in. But again, the block is in the tool. This is going to be down recessed in there a little bit more. Make sure before you totally put the die in the tool that this pin right here is definitely going into that hole, and not on the side of it. It'll break, but it's got to go into that hole. So it may seem like I stressed, don't break that pin an awful lot there, but here's why. I put the die in. This is another die, and it goes into the slot here of the tool. But what happens, you can crank this down and you open it up, so that lets this go down. So when you actually get that into the slot, you're cranking that up into it. So it's going to go into, say this is the die that's into there. It's going to go into it just like this, and you're pushing down, and you really can't see if you're in the hole or not, but you get it up tight to the hole. Just tighten it up, and then it's hydraulic. All you got to do is put the pressure on. I might need some fluid here maybe. I've put my first flare in, and you can kind of see it's kind of mashed it in there. And the reason it's called a double flare is because now I'm going to use a different die, and you can see the difference between these two dies. This one's just going to smash it and kind of round it and keep it tight, and then this one we'll just put a nice V into it where it seals into the to the fitting. So next I'm going to put this die in and smash it in a little bit, and we will have our double flare. So I went ahead and put just a single flare in, and I smashed it pretty hard, and I had it in kind of far, so you can kind of see it's out of shape, and almost by intention I tried to do it more extreme. But you can just see the flare. I mean, something like that being straightened out would work good for, you know, water, brass, you know, and water fittings and stuff like that, but not for brake lines. So what you need to do is really get that double flare. You can see how it rounds that edge around, and then it pushes that in there. You can kind of see in there, it clamps on both sides. It compresses against both sides. So the flare compresses against the fitting itself, and then the inside of the flare will compress against the fitting that it's going into. if you look inside of a fitting there, you can see how it's kind of got a flare on it, so the flare compresses into that flare. So that's why it's called a double flare. Now once you've mastered doing the double flare, and do a couple of them, just to make sure you got it, I've got my first brake line, I've got it tightened in there, make sure I don't cross thread anything. I've got it tightened into the master cylinder, but that's all finger tight. I would definitely recommend using a line wrench. A line wrench just goes all the way around, and what it does, it lets you put the wrench over the line and get all of the sides of the fitting except one. So use your line wrench, get everything tightened down, and just keep working that way. But before I tighten them all down, I like to get all my parts built and then put them on, hand tighten them all, look at everything, make sure I got it right, and then from there I'll go on and tighten things down. So I'll just move on to building a few more brake lines. Before I build any line, if it's going to be a longer line, I'm coming off the roll, and you can see it's all kind of bent. This is really a great tool. What you do is you just put the tube into it. Once you have the tube into it, you can just kind of run it along it. And you can see it does a pretty good job of straightening out the tube. So instead of having to try to hand straighten the coil, which you can definitely do, that's just kind of a handy tool. So I've straightened out a line. I've got a flare on one end and I got my fitting. Make sure the fitting is between your bend and on the flare, otherwise you won't be able to get that fitting around the corner. So I've kind of got it set up. I need to build a 90-degree bend into this. I've got it laid out and fitted, so I'm going to go ahead and bend that now. So I put my fitting in. I've got my bend pretty close to where I want it. I'm going to come across this side, bend another one. And again, on the Spirit frame, we've kind of pre-thought this out. We're going to go through this hole right here, and the hole is already in the bracket, and that'll go to this fitting here. But on the through frame fitting, we use a couple of different kind of through frame fittings. This one needs to have a T in it. So what I've done, I've got a brass T here, but I have to have two fittings so that I can put a flared end on both ends. So we'll put some tape on that, Teflon tape, and put this piece in. And that'll be our fitting for this to come around to. On the other side, since it's just a pipe thread on this side, what we'll have is a fitting. The fitting will go in onto this side, pipe thread on one side and an AN fitting on the other. So then we've got our braided line here, and the braided line is going to come off, and we'll just go right onto that. The braided line comes already done with the fittings on it. So this will be there, and this will go to the caliper. So you can see it'll come down to the bottom here of the caliper. And what we'll do is we'll put our banjo bolt in there, and the banjo and the crush washer. So we'll just move around the corner and keep on bending lines here. As you run your brake lines, the shorter ones, you can pre-bend and fit and then put your fittings on. I've got the shorter one here coming down around underneath going to the master cylinder. I pre-bent all that. I've got the one coming up and around over this way. So all these are pre-bent. But once you start getting into the longer lines, you may be better off to bend it, come around. I put the clamp here. What I did here is drill and tap a 1/4 inch 20 stainless screw. So I'm going to come up and I'm going to bend it around, but this is going to go underneath the frame rail all the way up to the front here. So it's kind of hard to pre-bend all of that and get the right length. So I've just got it extra long. I'm going to go ahead and bend it from this point on, and then put the fitting on it when I get to where I want to be on the front. So I treated the long run on this side the same as I did on the other. I went ahead and connected it to the T over here. Again, I run the proportioning valve on the front. The front of the car is so much lighter. A lot of people are going to say, oh, you need it on the back and blah, blah, blah. The goal is to have all your brakes stop even. And what you're going to need to do is cut the pressure down in the front so that when you're on like a slick concrete or on gravel, your front tires don't lock up first and push. Anyway, I got it all put in and down, bent to where I want it, and it's going to go up under here. I know the right size now. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to have to straighten this out a little bit to get that flare on there with the fitting. So I'll straighten it out and rebend it and put the last flare on. Now that we got all our brake lines run, it's time to go ahead and connect the lines to the calipers. So we've got a braided hose coming off with an AN3 fitting. Now in the caliper, you're going to need to put a banjo bolt and a banjo. And you can see these two brass washers. These are crush washers. So one goes on each side of the banjo, and it will go up into the caliper here. You can see on this side I've already installed the banjo and the banjo bolt. Put on the braided line with the AN3 fittings. Connected it to the body through the through frame fitting, and it's all plumbed back to the master cylinder. If you leave this a little loose, you can kind of twist it to where you want, get the shape of it, and then tighten everything down. It will hold that shape pretty good. In the back, we do the same thing. Up underneath the caliper goes the banjo bolt, the banjo, crush washers. We've got the braided line. You can see on this side we've already got it all attached. Again, if you leave everything a little bit loose, get your lines bent to the way that you want them to be, and then tighten it down. It'll pretty much hold that shape then. So we've got our front and rear calipers connected to the system now. Time to just make sure everything is tight. So a quick rundown of brake lines on a T-bucket. We start with our master cylinder. This one's got power brakes. It's got the booster, and on ours, it's a Corvette master cylinder. Make sure you've got a proportioning valve in line there. Now, I don't care what anybody says, the front end of a T-bucket is way lighter, and you need to put the proportioning valve on the front and cut it down because you don't want your front wheels locking up on gravel or in the slick concrete. On ours, we put the brake switch in line there, tee it on the front. I like to tee it on the front and come one across the cross member and one down the other side, left side. You can run them both all the way down and split them in the front, but then that's just more to see up here. I run everything down underneath. I go ahead and drill, tap, and put all of the brake lines in. Come around the front, we got through frame fittings, AN3, braided hose. You got your caliper with the banjo and the banjo bolt. You can kind of twist these by how you twist it and tighten it down. It kind of holds its shape the way it goes there. You've got your front calipers, both sides. And then you got two lines coming. You got the other line coming to the back. So we come back through the back. We split it right here. Through frame fitting, come through, same thing. This one has disc rear brakes. When you tighten it down here, you can kind of, the way you twist it is how it's going to kind of hold its shape there. Come along. Again, we drilled and tapped. Use a stainless screw in there to hold that. And that's about it. So a couple things. One is try to make it as neat and tidy as possible. You don't want to see brake lines everywhere. And the other one, make sure your flares are good. If you've never done it before, practice on a few. You can get some hydraulic flaring tools. It's a little pricey, but it does a really good job, or you can just get one where you just kind of crank it down. But remember, it has to be a double flare. So practice your flares for a little bit if you haven't done flares before. And the last FYI, don't forget to put your fitting on before you put the flare on. Otherwise, you're going to have to cut your flare out to put the fitting back on. So that's it. That's how we plumb a tea bucket.